the progressives and academics who refer to Israel as an outpost of Western civilization like it's a bad thing, please note, Western civilization is what gave the world pretty much every goddamn liberal precept that liberals are supposed to adore. Individual liberty, scientific inquiry, rule of law, religious freedom, women's rights, human rights, democracy, trial by jury, freedom of speech. One can find all these concepts in today's Israel, and the world would be a better place if it had more Israels. Of course, this message falls on deaf ears to the current crop who reduce everything to being only victims or victimizers, so Israel is lumped in as the toxic fruit of the victimizing West. And for the record, the Jews didn't colonize Israel or anywhere ever except maybe Boca Raton. All marginalized people live better today because of Western ideals, not in spite of them.
Good morning. It is Saturday, Enemies of My Country Saturday, April the 13th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and the Enemies of My Country. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
We're living in a country that's the finest place on earth, but some folks don't appreciate this land that gave them birth. I hear that up in Washington they're having an awful fuss, 'cause communists and spies are making monkeys out of us. The bureaus and departments have been busy night and day. They're figuring out just how we gave our secrets all away. And Congress has appointed a committee, so they said, to find out who's American and who's a low-down red. They called him up to Washington to speak for Uncle Sam. But when they asked them what they are, they shut up like a clam. I wish they'd take and put me on the witness stand today. I'd shout so loud old Stalin could hear me all the way. I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own. Our government is bigger than it ever was today. The more they hire to work for it, the more they have to pay. Our public servants should be proud and honest, you would think, instead of taking bribes and dressing up their wives and me. The taxes keep on going up, of that there is no doubt, but still they just can't take it in as fast as they dish it out. Our national debt is monster size and growing every day. Our children's children still unborn are gonna have to pay. Our dollar used to be the soundest money on this earth, but now $2 won't even buy one good dollar's worth. Unless we stop inflation and take care of what we've got, the communists may win the fight and never fire a shot. Oh, I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch.
We can never at one and the same time question all traditional values. Such absolute doubt could lead only to the destruction of our civilization, and in view of the numbers to which economic progress has allowed the human race to grow, to extreme misery and starvation. Complete abandonment of all traditional values is of course impossible. It would make man incapable of acting. F.A. Hayek. Human action flows out of value systems. Those who hold traditional values in disdain have every right to put the burden of legitimacy on those who hold to them. But human action throughout history has led to greater growth and less misery. Those who would dismiss the traditions and values that have accompanied human action throughout civilization carry a burden themselves, accounting for what value system will replace that which we dismiss without wreaking havoc on civilization. It's a tall order.
And that was There's No Free Lunch. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
Your words in quotation marks, our words in italics. You know, those Tea Party types look mighty dangerous to me. Why, there could be another Tim McVeigh or Lee Harvey Oswald lurking among them. Whereas the G12 protesters and the Cinco de Mayo crowd are the very models of engaged political theater. You can't possibly mean that. As far as we're concerned, the Christian right and the Midwestern militias are by far the greatest threat to the Republic, much worse than the Muslims. You can't possibly mean that. If only the Catholic Church would allow its priests to marry, we wouldn't have all these pedophiles running around preying on altar boys. You can't possibly mean that. Or better yet, wield this handy phrase preemptively, as we especially like to do. When we're prattling on about one bit of received wisdom or another, cut in with your own verbal karate chop to the jugular, whether it addresses the immediate point we're making or not. The point is to stop the argument in its tracks, to assert your higher reality. You can't possibly mean that you support what's going on in Washington. You can't possibly mean that you support forcing people into unions. You can't possibly mean that you want to flush our children down the drain for the sake of the corrupt educational establishment. You can't possibly mean that you think the Great Society was a good thing. You can't possibly mean that you want to go to the post office to see your doctor. You get the picture. 2. Everyone knows that. Another all-purpose put-down, signifying that you're a complete idiot. It's a riff on the old Soviet, as is well known, boilerplate, which pretty much signaled that whatever statement came next was a complete and utter lie, although we preferred to use the term higher truth. Everyone knows that Al Gore really won the 2000 election, that John Kerry really was a war hero, even though he only spent 16 weeks in Vietnam, and yet won more medals per minute than Audie Murphy, that Ted Kennedy was the lion of the Senate instead of the swimmer of Chappaquiddick, that Jimmy Carter was a misunderstood president, and that Alger Hiss and the other Soviet spies were really innocent. Of course they're innocent in our mind. Gainsay any of these theses, and we'll nail you to the door of that church in Wittenberg, just like Martin Luther King did. Still, you ought to give it a try and watch what happens. Warning, be prepared for some exploding heads. Everyone knows that the Democrats are the party of slavery, segregation, secularism, and sedition. You can't possibly mean that. Everyone knows that Avatar sucked. You can't possibly mean that. Everyone knows that global warming is a complete crock, that a bunch of crooked scientists fake the data in order to siphon even more tax money out of our pockets, and that the polar bears are friskier than ever. You can't possibly mean that. Everyone knows that the real war is in the electoral trenches, where the left has been rigging the game since the get-go. You can't possibly mean that. But of course you do. 3. You're not really. This one's meant to indicate that the person you're speaking with is little better than a cave dweller, a superstitious moron whose walnut-sized brain is probably stuffed with religious dogma, and who is profoundly uninterested in all the major important truths discovered in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by Marx, Engels, Lenin, the Frankfurt School, Marcuse, and Oprah. Categories include practicing Catholic, Orthodox Jew, Republican, conservative, resident of flyover country, gun owner, heterosexual, member of a two-parent family, and a driver of a 1984 Chrysler Barron. Time to turn the tables. Come on, this one's easy. You can do it. You're not really still a Democrat, are you? Everyone knows that all right-thinking people were switching to independent, and not moving in lockstep with the neo-Stalinists. You're not really still an atheist, are you? Everyone knows there's no upside. You're not really still going to stop at one kid, are you? Small families are so antisocial. Besides, everyone knows that we need lots and lots of kids to support the Social Security system. You're not really still buying that a free market blew up the economy, are you? Everyone knows that what the Democrats did for decades with Fannie and Freddie made the Hindenburg look like a soap bubble. Let's analyze this. Another invaluable phrase, guaranteed to send us shrieking for the exits if you're ready to call it a night. You're not really going to drive that piece of hybrid crap, are you? Because everyone knows that they run up everybody's electricity bill, cause more polluting coal-fired electrical plants to come online to meet demand, unless you want to build a few nukes, and endanger your own and your kid's life. To which, of course, we will answer, you can't possibly mean that.
And that was Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. And next up is Rules for Retrogrades. Back in a minute.
Rule 36. Young retrogrades should be neither sheep nor wolves, but sheep dogs. Young men should be taught to fight according to the mantra, never start fights, but finish them. Being smart or proficient at debate is no longer good enough in 2019 America. The time for flabby, comfortable, conservative leisure is at an end. The battle of ideas is quickening to the point at which it will soon become an actual battle. Hence, our last few rules involve grouping and preparatory criteria, who and how to prepare. We are mustering to stand and fight, not only retrogrades, but all men of goodwill who may be counted upon. But first, retrogrades must make themselves worthy of a fight. Rocky did not fight Apollo without a rigorous training regimen executed over a grueling period of time. Radicals categorically avoid non-rigged exchanges of ideas where they cannot interrupt or yell because they are aware that they are fated to fail in contests of ideas. It was the radical Marx who said that the purpose of philosophy is not understanding the world, but changing it. The radicals do not care if their formulations are correct. They only care about power. This explains why they turn to displays of semi-force and outright force instead of learning from their errors in debate. Only good men heed their past errors. Radicals simply learn how to implement force, giving the flimsy appearance of righteousness to wrong conclusions. A retrograde must be able to stand down any radical when the eventuality of the radical's defeat in the battle of wits inevitably coaxes forth the violent response from him. While such a statement did not correctly modify the status of the world a decade or two ago, it is one of the final and most important rules for retrogrades. Prepare for battle. Hopefully the battle won't be necessary, but this hope for peace grows more foolish as each day passes. To this end, the retrograde must maintain physical fitness in order to maintain, rather to regain, the imposing male standard of the West. While not every man has the time or training or talent to become proficient in the martial arts, virtually every man has 30 minutes per day to train at home with weights. That way, even a martially untrained retrograde can exercise an imposing presence in the public defense of ideas.
And that was Rules for Retrogrades, Rule 36. And next up is Rules for Patriots. Back in a minute.
In 2008, Ron Paul was getting laughed off the national stage as a quack for campaigning for president on auditing the Fed. 4 years later, almost all of his 2012 GOP campaign rivals had at least tacitly signed on to the concept. Why? Well, I suppose it's because they had all sincerely seen the light. But like it says in my favorite country song, don't pee on me and tell me it's raining. More likely, it's because Ron Paul nearly won the 2011 straw poll, then nearly won the 2012 Iowa caucuses, then got 40% of the I'm not Mitt Romney vote in the 2012 Virginia primary, and then saw his people take over the Republican Party in states like Maine, Nevada, Minnesota, and Iowa. The system is scared to death of the Ron Paul revolution, so they're trying to patronize it by offering a symbolic vote, which will fall a few votes short of winning, of course, in the hopes that it will be satisfied by this contrivance the way Christian conservatives were satisfied with such milquetoast for 30 years beforehand. Always remember, my fellow patriots who are challenging the system, whenever the system offers you something, you already have it, and that's exactly the entry point where the real negotiating starts. Except you shouldn't negotiate at all, but accept nothing less than unconditional surrender when the future is at stake for your children and grandchildren. Look to Alexander the Great for inspiration. In 331 BC, King Darius was attempting to stop upstart Alexander the Great's quest to conquer his empire. He sent Alexander a letter promising him a substantial portion of his territory and his daughter's hand in marriage if Alexander would agree to stand down. Alexander responded, quote, "What you offer me is already mine. As for your daughter, if I want to marry her, I will." In 330 BC, Alexander the Great conquered Darius's empire. If Rand Paul wants a real vote on auditing the Fed, then he should leverage his base that he inherited from his dad to force that vote upon the system by threatening them with it. That's how real reform happens, not by settling for scraps from the establishment's table. By playing the game instead of forcing the establishment's hand all over the internet, Paulistas were turning on Rand and then turning on each other for doing so. For example, one of the most active Ron Paul loyalists on Facebook posted this as his status update after Rand's endorsement of Romney, paraphrasing some of Rand's justifications. Quote, "I don't understand why people are upset about Rand Paul endorsing Mitt Romney. Sometimes when you fight for principles, you have to make compromises in order to ensure personal gain. Remember what Winston Churchill said during the Great Battle of Britain. England was always my first choice, but hey, Germany looks stronger now, so it's time to join them. Hitler, he comes from a large family, so we have that connection." Unquote. Ouch. That's going to leave a mark. Now, in Rand's defense, he got it right a few months later when he filibustered the U.S. Senate over the disclosure President Obama had a secret drone kill list intended to target American citizens. Stand with Rand became not just a meme that night, but a movement. Several of Rand's contemporaries, like Texas Senator Ted Cruz, came alongside him during that filibuster. That's the kind of leadership people are looking for. They're looking for champions who take on the system, not cater to it. Catering to the system is just what the hackneyed GOP establishment wants. Divide and conquer is the oldest strategy of them all. The Republican Party establishment is a Zen master when it comes to pitting conservative leaders against actual conservatives. We send leaders to Washington or our state capitals to fight on our behalf. Eventually they wear them down little by little until they become fully institutionalized by the system. And finally they return home to fight us for the system instead of fighting the system for us. By turning our leaders into their human shields, the Republican Party establishment deflects scrutiny and pressure from us to perform where it matters most. Public policy. I used to think the GOP stupidly fell into this trap of perpetual civil warfare out of cowardice. But eventually I figured out this was their plan all along. They co-opt our leaders so we believe we're fighting them when really we're fighting each other. That's why one of the last best hopes we have for reform via political activism in this country is the Tea Party movement, because it's spontaneous combustion. The longer the Tea Party movement avoids the temptation of creating a cabal of high-profile leaders perpetually on the Sunday morning talk shows and pretending to speak for its people, the better its chances to accomplish some real good. When the system pressures the Tea Party to become more organized, what it really means is hurry up and appoint some ambitious spokespeople so we know specifically who we have to buy off and co-opt. Whenever you hear the following phrases from your elected representatives, know that you and the conservative base are about to be abandoned or already have been. Phrases like, you have to be more realistic. Well, that's not how we do things around here. That's the way we've always done things. Rome wasn't built in a day. We'll get 'em next time or session. Half a loaf, better than none. We either hang together or we'll hang alone. Now understand this one is a total bastardization of the famous line from Benjamin Franklin, who was talking about everyone risking it all for liberty, when the system here is talking about individuals risking nothing for re-election. Or then there's this: you have to work within the system. When your elected representatives start regurgitating these Republicrat cliches back to you in the grassroots, get them out of the system and back home as soon as possible to get them around some good influences before it's too late. Remember, bad company always corrupts good character. Earlier in this book, we cited the 4 pillars of the left's power base: the child-killing industry, the homosexual agenda, educrats, and government sector employee unions. When was the last time you saw Democrat national leadership or prominent Democrats anywhere in the country abandon any of these bases? The left goes to war for their base, even to the point of shutting down the government or losing an election. Like when Vice President Joe Biden said the left would shut the government down if Republicans on Capitol Hill insisted on defunding Planned Parenthood during the debt ceiling showdown of 2011. Or when President Obama came out against marriage the day after North Carolinians affirmed it by almost 30 points. 40% of Democrats in North Carolina voted to affirm marriage as well, but they weren't the Democrats that represented the 4 pillars the left never abandons. Most of them were white working class or black Democrat voters. We have seen the left abandon ethnic and racial minorities as well as private sector unions, but we never see them abandon and betray the child-killing industry, the homosexual agenda, educrats, and government sector employee unions. So if you're a racial and ethnic minority, single mom, or a working class white that is a member of a private sector union, you need to know where you stand with the Democrats. It's quite simple, really. You don't. Or at the very least, you stand in the back of the line, behind Planned Parenthood, LGBT, or is it now LGBTQ, A, B, C, D, F, G? Do these people ever stop adding letters? NEA and AFSCME. You're their booty call. They'll use you when it's an election, but have no use for you after that. Now, let's look at the 3 groups that make up the traditional Reagan coalition. Values voters, that would be pro-life, pro-family voters, limited government advocates like tax reformers, pro-growthers, libertarians, etc., and those who believe in a strong national defense like peace through strength. The Republicans have traditionally been seen as the strong national defense party, but there is little doubt and lots of evidence they have abandoned those of us in the other 2 groups repeatedly. In politics, you are what hills you're willing to die on. So based on their actual record of the past 2 decades, and not the rhetoric, we would say the leadership of the Democrat Party is for child killing, moral depravity, Islamists, anti-American progressive intellectuals, and statists. On the other hand, we'd have to say the leadership of the Republican Party is for morally indifferent crony capitalists that think it's our job to be the world's rent-a-cop. I'm guessing that's not the Republican Party most of you listening to this signed up for. At this point, the Republicrats are beyond salvaging and just need to be repealed and replaced, to borrow a popular phrase these days. But when we replace them with our own people, they must not make the mistake of abandoning us for them. And if they do, well, then we treat traitors accordingly.
And that was Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. That was the end of Chapter 9. And next up is the Daily Laws. Back in a minute.
April 13th. Better to be attacked than ignored. Burning more brightly than those around you is a skill that no one is born with. You have to learn to attract attention, as surely as the lodestone attracts iron. At the start of your career, you must attach your name and reputation to a quality, an image, that sets you apart from other people. This image can be something like a characteristic style of dress, or a personality quirk that amuses people and gets talked about. Once the image is established, you have an appearance, a place in the sky for your star. It is a common mistake to imagine that this peculiar appearance of yours should not be controversial, that to be attacked is somehow bad. Nothing could be further from the truth. To avoid being a flash in the pan and having your notoriety eclipsed by another, you must not discriminate between different types of attention. In the end, every kind will work in your favor. Society craves larger-than-life figures, people who stand above the general mediocrity. Never be afraid then of the qualities that set you apart and draw attention to you. Court controversy, even scandal. It is better to be attacked, even slandered, than ignored. All professions are ruled by this law, and all professionals must have a bit of the showman about them. Daily law. Make no distinction between kinds of attention. Notoriety of any sort will bring you power. Better to be slandered and attacked than ignored. The 48 Laws of Power. Law 6. Court attention at all cost.
And that was the Daily Law for April the 13th from the Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Next up, Bishop Barron. Back in a minute.
There is no guru, teacher, founder, nobody who's as strange and relentless as Jesus. And therefore, the religion attached to Jesus is the strangest of them all. Jesus says, whoever loves father or mother more than me, son or daughter more than me, is not worthy of me. The Buddha would not say this. Muhammad wouldn't say this. Moses wouldn't say this. Confucius wouldn't say this. Aristotle wouldn't say it. Plato wouldn't say it. I don't know anybody in the philosophical or religious tradition who would say such a strange thing. But Jesus says it. Your love for me personally has to go beyond the most intense loves of your life. Now, you see the point I'm making, everybody, and why I speak of the strangeness of Christianity. He wouldn't say this unless he himself in person were the very highest good. That's what's at stake.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Next up, Ayn Rand. Back in a minute. Quote, morality, like medicine, is a science, which means that one must carefully and systematically study its principles to see that they do indeed flow from the absolute nature of reality and the factual requirements of achieving success and happiness within it. Moral principles must be accepted because we understand firsthand that they are life-serving and happiness-promoting, unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Next up, the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute.
Now only one question remained. When would it happen? As April turned to May, Hitler was deluged with all kinds of conflicting reports, rumors, and sightings. The information was confusing, taxing his strained mind, but two nuggets of intelligence seemed to clarify the picture. First, a German agent in England reported that the Allies would attack Normandy, southeast of the Pas-de-Calais, between June 5th and 7th. But the Germans had strong indications that this man was operating as a double agent, and his report was clearly part of an Allied disinformation campaign. The attack would probably be coming at the end of June or beginning of July, when the weather was generally more predictable. Then, later in May, a series of more reliable German spies spotted Britain's top general, Sir Bernard Montgomery, in Gibraltar and then in Algiers. Montgomery would certainly command a large part of any invading force. The invasion could not be imminent if he was so far away. On the night of June 5th, Hitler pored over the maps. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe the plan was for Normandy all along. He had to consider both options. He would not be fooled in what might be the most decisive battle of his life. The British were tricky. He had to keep his forces mobile in case it was Normandy after all. He would not commit himself until he knew for sure. Reading the weather reports for the Channel, stormy that evening, he took his usual sleeping pill and went to bed. Early next morning, Hitler woke to startling news. A massive invasion was underway in southern Normandy. A large armada had left England in the middle of the night, and hundreds of parachutists had been dropped near the Normandy coast. As the day progressed, the the reports became more exact. The Allies had landed on the beaches southeast of Cherbourg. A critical moment had come. If some of the forces stationed in the Pas-de-Calais were hurried to the beaches of Normandy, the Allies could be pinned and thrown back into the sea. This was the recommendation of Rommel and Rundstedt, who anxiously awaited Hitler's approval. But through the night and into the following day, Hitler hesitated. Then, just as he was on the verge of sending reinforcements to Normandy, he received word of increased Allied activity in the Fusag area. Was Normandy, in fact, a giant diversion? If he moved his reserves there, would Patton immediately cross the Channel to the Pas-de-Calais? No, Hitler would wait to see if the attack was real. And so the days went by, with Rommel and Rundstedt fuming at his indecision. After several weeks, Hitler finally accepted that Normandy was the real destination. But by then he was too late. The Allies had established a beachhead. In August, they broke out of Normandy, sending the Germans into full retreat. To Hitler, the disaster was yet another indication of the incompetence of those around him. He had no idea how deeply and decisively he had been fooled. Interpretation. In trying to deceive Hitler about the Normandy invasions, the Allies were faced with a problem. Not only was the Führer suspicious and wary by nature, he knew of previous attempts to mislead him and knew that the Allies would have to try to deceive him again. How could the Allies possibly disguise the actual goal of a vast armada from a man who had reason to believe they would try to mislead him and was scrutinizing their every move? Fortunately, British intelligence had been able to provide the planners of the D-Day landings, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill, with information that would prove invaluable to them. First, they knew that Hitler was growing paranoid. He was isolated and overworked, his imagination overheated. He was prone to emotional outbursts, and he was suspicious of everyone and everything. Second, they knew of his belief that the Allies would try to invade the Balkans before France, and that the landing site in France would be in the Pas-de-Calais. He almost seemed to want these invasions to happen, as proof of his superior reasoning powers and foresight. Fooling Hitler into keeping his forces dispersed across Europe and France would give the Allies a slim margin of time in which to establish a beachhead. The key was to present him a picture composed of many different kinds of evidence that would tell him the Allies were doing just what he had thought they would. But this picture could not be made up of all kinds of flashing signs pointing to the Balkans and the Pas-de-Calais. That would reek of deception. Instead, they had to create something that had the weight and feel of reality. It had to be subtle, a mix of banal truths with little falsehoods stitched in. If Hitler saw that in its outlines it supported his expectations, his overactive mind would fill in the rest. This is how the Allies wove such a picture. By late 1943, the British had secretly identified all of the German agents active in England. The next step was to turn them into unwitting double agents by feeding them false information about Allied plans for an attack on the Balkans and Norway, say, and the massing of a fictional army, commanded by Patton, the American general Hitler so feared, opposite the Pas-de-Calais. This army, Fusag, existed only in piles of phony paperwork and wireless transmissions that mimicked a normal army. German agents were allowed to steal Fusag documents and intercept transmissions, carefully misleading messages, but at the same time banal and bureaucratic ones, too banal to be seen as fake. Working with film designers, the Allies built an elaborate set of rubber, plastic, and wood that from German reconnaissance planes would look like an enormous camp of tents, airplanes, and tanks. The German general who saw Fusag with his own eyes was misled about the direction he was taking toward London. He had actually passed the real army to the west of Fusag's supposed site, massing for the invasion of Normandy. As the date of the invasion drew near, the Allies left clues combining fact and fiction still more intricately. The real time and place of the invasion were planted with an agent whom the Germans completely mistrusted, giving Hitler the feeling that he had seen through a deception, when in fact he was staring at the truth. Now, if real information on the timing of the invasion somehow leaked out, Hitler would not know what to believe. The Allies knew that reports on the buying up of Pas-de-Calais maps in Switzerland would reach Hitler, and this would have its own realistic logic. As for the Montgomery sightings in Gibraltar, little did the German agents know they were seeing a look-alike, a man trained to act like the general. In the end, the picture the Allies painted was so real to Hitler that well into July he believed in it, long after D-Day had actually happened. Through such subtle deceptions, they had compelled him to keep his forces dispersed, perhaps the decisive factor in the success of the invasion. In a competitive world, deception is a vital weapon that can give you a constant advantage. You can use it to distract your opponents, send them on goose chases, waste valuable time and resources in defending attacks that never come. But more than likely, your concept of deception is wrong. It does not entail elaborate illusions or all sorts of showy distractions. People are too sophisticated to fall for such things. Deception should mirror reality. It can be elaborate, as the British deception around D-Day was, but the effect should be of reality only subtly, slightly altered, not completely transformed. To mirror reality, you must understand its nature. Above all, reality is subjective. We filter events through our emotions and preconceptions, seeing what we want to see. Your false mirror must conform to people's desires and expectations, lulling them to sleep. If the Allies had wanted to attack the Pas-de-Calais, as Hitler suspected, and tried to convince Hitler the attack was coming to Normandy, that would have been a great deal harder than playing on his pre-existing belief. Your false mirror must incorporate things that are visibly true. It must seem somewhat banal, like life itself. It can have contradictory elements, as the D-Day deception did. Reality is often contradictory. In the end, like an Escher painting, you must blend truth and illusion to the point where they become indistinguishable, and your false mirror is taken for reality.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War, the next part of Chapter 23, from Robert Greene. And the next up is The Enemies of My Country. Back in a minute.
Duchess was awakened by a phone ringing on her nightstand. Her eyes opened in the darkness. She knew from the ringtone that this was business. When your duties required you to be on call, the agency paid to outfit your home with a secure line. And she rolled sideways to reach for the receiver by feel, in a motion she'd executed many times before. Sitting up and bringing the receiver to her ear, she said, "Duchess here." A man replied, "Ma'am, we've had an update in PIR 08. She felt a slight tremor in her hand as she turned on the bedside lamp, illuminating her solitary bedroom. A limited number of wake-up criteria would result in her receiving a call like this, and priority intelligence requirement number 8 was the last one she wanted to receive a notification about. She'd crafted the wording to be sufficiently vague. Any law enforcement reports with possible links to terrorist-related violence or intelligence gathering in Charlottesville or Albemarle County, Virginia, USA. That line of PIR wouldn't look out of place amid the others pertaining to Bari Khan, all of them worthy of a call at 3:16 in the morning. But Duchess's unstated reason for instituting it had nothing to do with Bari Khan, and everything to do with David's team. And as the man continued speaking, she realized her fears were coming true. Charlottesville PD responded to a report of gunshots at a metalworking facility. They found 2 unidentified victims, one with a stab wound and a slit throat. The other had multiple stab wounds, a bullet in his abdomen, and a cracked skull from blunt force trauma of some kind. Did they arrest anyone? One suspect fled the scene and is currently at large.
Bloody boot prints leading out of the building indicate 2 to 3 additional suspects that escaped. No one is in custody at this time. Name of the facility? Patton Metal Works, formerly Dominion Metal Fab. Duchess's heart sank. As part of the security clearance process, CIA officers and contractors had their friends and family screened with an eye to indiscretions lending themselves to blackmail and business holdings that could be used to launder illicit earnings. Both represented a risk for manipulation by foreign intelligence services trying to flip an agency employee, and Duchess had screened the backgrounds of David's team with a particularly wary eye. She knew that David's next of kin had recently sold Dominion Metal Fab. Find out everything you can about the facility, sales records, buyer background, all of it. I'm coming in. There's something else, ma'am. Duchess's heart fell. After the bomb this man had just dropped, what else could there possibly be? What is it? The clean-out team arrived at the Long Wing Isofact 20 minutes ago. They reported some missing equipment. Such as? I've got the itemized list with serial numbers, but for starters, weapons, lasers, suppressors, night vision devices. Got it, she said. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She hung up and wiped the sleep from her eyes, rising quickly to get dressed. Gosweiler wasn't going to miss the Charlottesville killings on the morning news, and she couldn't risk him finding out about missing agency equipment from any source besides herself. There was precious little time remaining before he was awake. If she hadn't taken action by the time that happened, he'd suspect her allowance of, if not outright complicity in, her former targeted killing team taking unsanctioned paramilitary action in the homeland. So Duchess hurried to her car, beginning the drive to agency headquarters and considering how to best handle the delicate matter of arresting David and his team. 52. Worthy cruised down the road, his thumb tapping the steering wheel in time with the country song playing on the radio. The sun was rising, casting its light over the richly forested countryside on either side of the road. Glancing at his GPS, he knew he was getting close, and rounding a curve a moment later, he saw the load signal in the form of a pair of crossed branches ahead, both lying at the edge of the forest as if they'd fallen haphazardly. Checking his rear view, Worthy activated his four-way flashers and pulled off to the side of the road. He was prepared to make a go-around in the event of other traffic on the road, but for the moment the coast was clear. Worthy barely had time to press the unlock button before David lunged out of the trees and wrenched open the back passenger door. Go, he said, as if Worthy would have preferred to loiter around the pickup site until a patrol car cruised past. Killing his flashers and accelerating back to cruising speed, Worthy texted Ian with news of his successful recovery of their team leader, and then briefly turned to look at the passenger behind him. Then he returned his eyes to the road, giving a grim shake of his head. David, to put it lightly, looked like shit. His eyes bore dark circles, face and clothes covered in dirt, looking more homeless drifter than shooter. Everyone make it out last night? He asked. Yeah, Worthy replied. You were the only... What the hell are you listening to? Pausing, Worthy said, That's Merle Haggard right there. Want me to turn it off? No, David said. Depressing country music is the perfect way to tie up that train wreck of an operation. Worthy read between the lines of David's statement and turned off the car stereo. They rode on in silence for a few moments before Worthy spoke again. Looks like you had a rough night. I needed to crush some cardio anyway. How are the guys? Worthy sighed. We spent the night bleaching the blood off our kits and burning the boots that weren't going to be clean anytime soon. You and Ian fired the only shots, so Riley's down 2 weapons once we get rid of yours. The one Ian used is already at the bottom of the Ravenna River, along with Cancer's knife. David shook his head. Cancer loved that knife. Thought that inhuman bastard was going to cry, but I'm sure he's got plenty more. If Ian or the cops had found anything useful, I'm guessing you would have led with that fact. Yeah, boss, I would have. Police didn't find any rockets. The hard drives haven't revealed anything suspicious. Matter of fact, there's no digital record of any production at all under the new company, but that could just be because they hadn't started operations yet. Well, shit. Cancer and Riley didn't see anything in the workshop? I wouldn't go that far. No sign of the launch assembly, or any tubes consistent with rocket size as best they could tell. But Cancer pulled a phone off the guy he killed. And that's where it gets interesting. No contacts, no calls made, so he must have memorized a number and erased the record each time he used it. These guys ran a tight ship. Ian's working on restoring the phone data, but apparently that can take some time. I don't suppose Duchess overlooked our little party last night. Good guess. She's been calling non-stop. And? Worthy looked at David as if he were crazy. And nothing. None of us are answering that call, but I'm guessing she's either seen the local news or found the ISAFAC cleaned out, or both. But explaining that is your job, boss. Happy 4th of July, David. Yeah. His team leader nodded, still facing the window. Happy 4th. '53. Ian looked up from his computer as Worthy and David entered. David looked like he'd been chewed and spit out from the wrong end of an industrial-sized blender. His green eyes ticked across the team before settling on Ian. Worthy smiled, placing his hands on David's shoulders and giving him a light shake. Our fearless leader was rode hard and put away wet last night, but he made it back none the worse for wear. Cancer stood from his seat and said, "Welcome back, boss." David ignored him, and even Riley for that matter. Instead, he kept a dull, almost threatening stare on Ian. "What have you found?" Ian detested the sight of David when he got this way. When pushed to the wall, he assumed a recklessness that had no place in tactical operations. Even the way he phrased his inquiry was telling. Not, "Have you found anything?" but a demand, "What have you found?" As if there had better be something or else. Fortunately, in the time it had taken Worthy to pick up their last remaining fugitive teammate, Ian had his one and only break so far. He said, "I've finished exploiting deleted information from the captured phone. Whoever this guy was, he was dialing a single number, checking in every hour, and deleting the call record afterward. To me, that's indicative of a stay-behind element, issued phones for the purpose and left in place as early warning in case anyone picked up the trail. Those two guys were probably just hired guns, with no idea who they were working for." "Well, that's good," Cancer said, "because Worthy clubbed the last one to death before we could ask him anything." Worthy frowned. "I've apologized for that multiple times." "Ian," David cut them off, "what did you find out about the number he was calling?" "Captured phone is a Missouri area code, while the number it was used to dial was an Arizona code. All that means is they established a solid burner network in advance. The key info, however, came from the cell tower records that the calls pinged off of. Captured phone was hitting here in Charlottesville every time, but the number it was dialing went through a tower in Fredericksburg." "Could it be a false ping, a call relay like we use?" "Could be," Ian admitted, "but if you had the technical sophistication to do that, why not use a more distant location?" "Because a close one is more convincing, that's why." "I can't say for sure, but I don't think so. Fredericksburg is pretty strategic." David grunted his disapproval. "Yeah, Fredericksburg is an even smaller pimple on the ass of Virginia than Charlottesville is. I don't think we're going to find anything significant for BK to destroy there." Ian said, "I told you before that Barry Khan wouldn't pair the launch assembly with the rockets until he was ready to attack. We don't know where the rockets made landfall in America, but it's a safe bet that the launch assembly was fabricated here in Charlottesville. That makes Fredericksburg an almost ideal location to pair the two because it's located along I-95, and that goes past every major city he could possibly want to attack. If Barry Khan is launching a weaponized semi-rig, as I suspect he is, he could drive north to D.C., Baltimore, Philly, or New York. If you want to clear out a few city blocks, New York is a hell of a place to do it, especially if he's attacking the Freedom Tower." "Boss," Cancer offered, "for the record, I agree with Ian. In lieu of any other meaningful information, and owing to our popularity with the Charlottesville PD at present, I say we get the hell out of town. Take our kit and stage in Fredericksburg until Ian finds another thread for us to follow." Ian blinked. "What if I don't? I can scan the available data, but if I don't find anything, I don't find anything." Cancer shrugged. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Neither have I," David said. "But that's the best idea I've heard so far." Then he placed a hand on Ian's shoulder, gripping it a little too firmly for comfort.
And you're a smart guy, he said, a hint of malice in his voice. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Just ask yourself what your dad would do. As Ian sat there, dumbstruck, the phone beside him began to ring. He checked the display, then looked at David. It's Duchess.
And that was the end of chapters 51, 52, and 53 from The Enemies of My Country by Jason Casper. Next week, chapter 54. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.